Good evening again, everyone, and welcome. My name is Isabel Molina, and I am the public programs producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's talk with Frieda Gordon as part of our Stories Survive series. Now, here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you again for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you're able to, you will visit the museum in person to see our current and upcoming exhibitions, including Art of Freedom, the life and work of Arthur Szyk, which recently opened on December 7th. And closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn captions on or off are posted in the chat. And if you have questions for our speakers during the program, we encourage you to put those in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Before we begin, I would also like to make a quick note that during this program, Frieda and her daughter Laura will be discussing Frieda's mother, Zelda Gordon, who was a Holocaust survivor. And you can find interviews with her through USC Shoah. So we encourage all of you to seek those out as well. Now, we are honored to be joined this evening by Frieda Gordon and her daughter, Laura Dicterow. Frieda Gordon was born and raised in Los Angeles. Her parents came to the United States a year before she was born, and they worked in sweatshops and saved until they could buy their first residential property, eventually moving to Beverly Hills when Frieda was 10 so that she could attend their excellent schools. She started playing the piano when she was 5 and became a classically trained concert pianist. She studied at Oberlin College and and as a double major in piano performance and international politics, and transferred to Juilliard after 2 years. After a career as a musician, Frieda went to law school and went on to have a long and successful career as a lawyer, the last 25 as a partner in her own 10-person law firm, along with her husband, Avery. Laura Dicterow is a communications major, graduate of the University of California, San Diego, with a long commitment to raising awareness of animal welfare and environmental issues. Her career has been dedicated to her passion, nonprofit animal protection, for over 25 years. She was on staff for the Humane Society of the United States, formerly the Ark Trust, for nearly 20 years, and worked for Farm Sanctuary as special events manager. She lives with her daughter Zoe and 2 dogs in Los Angeles, California. Thank you again for joining us, and now I'll hand things over to Frieda and Laura. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. It is my deepest pleasure to be able to talk about my mother in this forum, and also my father, I will say, Eli Gordon, um, because their story needs to be told to a new and broader audience. And I have just a short introduction about my relationship with my parents before I will actually read my mother's story in her own words. And then if there's time, I also want to share with you part of uh, the book that was in which she was a great part of, called Lest We Forget, um, because that has a lot of background information, and I think it's very interesting as well. So I struggled with memories of what my parents were. I can't see myself
We
as
can see you.
okay. I mean, I'm not in the big screen.
I think you're on the big screen for us, but I'll pin you so you show up a little bigger.
We were at odds most of, there we go. We were at odds most of the time. My father was 18 years older than my mother. And I was raised as an only child, although I did have a half brother of my dad's son. My father was pretty silent about his experience. Um, and when he did blurt something out about the Holocaust, I didn't really understand what he was saying. He had a hard time expressing himself, his feelings, and his memories. He kept to himself, but he worked very hard to make a good living for us. When he had the opportunity, he loved to sing and dance and have a good time. My mother was my rock and my savior, someone who loved me unconditionally, who rarely smiled or had fun, and who tried to keep all her fears and her dreams to herself. They gave me my musical education and pushed hard for me to succeed in life. My dad had lost a wife and a young son, Alexander, in the extermination camps, and kept not only his older son, Harold Gordon, alive throughout the years in the camps, but other children and adults as well. He risked his life over and over again so that Harold and many others could survive. My mother survived by virtue of many miracles and her own cunning, as will be discussed later in this program. Zelda's life was consumed by fear, anxiety, and grief. My dad chose to bury his feelings and enjoy the second life that he received after his liberation from Dachau. In fact, he changed his birth date to make him 5 years younger, as if he were resurrected from death after World War II. It was rare that they could allow themselves to be truly happy. Zelda was overjoyed to have born a child and determined that their child would have every advantage that they never had. Both of them worked all their lives for the express purpose to achieve that goal. That was a very heavy load for a child like me to accept. Zelda and Eli put on parties for every possible occasion. And Zelda's cooking, especially her sweet and sour meatballs, noodle kugel, apple cake, and chocolate marble cake, and beautiful table arrangements were renowned in the entire local Jewish community in Los Angeles. My birthday, my parents' birthday, their anniversary were all milestones that took on far greater importance than they would have for other people. Jewish holidays were especially difficult for my parents. Not only did they not have many relatives who had survived the Shoah, but my mother's family was all removed from the Grand Synagogue of the Grodno Poland ghetto and taken to camps on the eve of Yom Kippur. And so for her whole life, she could not go inside a synagogue on the high holy days. Their survivor friends became family. They were the strongest and most determined bunch of people I have ever known, who never allowed us to be alone on a Jewish holiday. Later on, as they all gained some economic stability, their social lives centered around many fundraisers for Israel, which included dancing and dinners at fancy hotels. Zelda was by nature shy and happy for others to take the limelight, although she worked tirelessly in her spare time for Israel and for the spread of knowledge about the Holocaust among the younger generations. After Eli's death in 1986 and a long period of mourning, she swallowed her nervousness and began speaking herself of what happened to her, to me, and my daughters. As a child of survivors, I had a unique relationship with both my parents, but especially my mother. You only have one mother, as she often liked to say to me. I had mine for 65 years and she for 18. That loss, coupled with the horrors that filled her days for the 6 or 7 years during the Nazi occupation, shaped her hope her entire life. Nevertheless, Zelda and Eli went on to create a life of love and courage and hope and endurance. And in that world of celebration of life, despite the despair, pain, and constant recurring nightmares, I lived. From my parents, I learned to be tenacious, to be true to myself, to respect and work to preserve individual rights, and accept responsibility for others less fortunate than me. Thank you all for attending, and my goal is for you to reflect on my parents' struggles, but marvel at their strength, to muse at their quirks but admire their tenacity, and to appreciate their generosity of spirit, love of family, and strength of will that prevailed against all odds. Ending that emotional part, um, I'm going to read what my mother wrote, and I didn't even know about it for years. Um, in her own words and in her English, my name is Zelda Gordon. I was born in Grodno, Poland on December 26, 1923. At the time of Hitler's occupation of my town, I was a teenager and lived with my mother, Fruma, and my father, Jacob. My father died 2 months before the war broke out from illness. I also had four brothers, Leon, Daniel, Aaron, and Joshua, and two sisters, Tamara and Deborah, all of whom were married with children when I was born. All of these people perished in the ovens of Treblinka and Auschwitz. Grodno's Jewish community dates back to the 14th century. One of the Polish kings, Stanislaw Batory, lived in Grodno. He was the first king that permitted Jews to live in Poland. Grodno's woods, resorts, and beauty was known throughout Europe. Grodno's 29,000 Jews lay claim to a treasure house of Jewish history and culture. During World War I, Grodno was under Russian rule. My father had been drafted into the Russian army. Evading service because of raging anti-Semitism, he fled to Japan and then to New York, where he hoped to resettle his family. However, in the post-war period after the reversion of the city of Grodno to Poland, he returned to the family, and then I was born. Since my brothers and sisters were born in Russia, they went to Russian and Hebrew schools. So my parents hired a tutor to teach them Polish. As I was growing up and the youngest of the family, my brothers and sisters raised me, and life was good. My oldest brother and sister married when I was a little girl. The house was always busy with young men and women dancing and singing. We had a Jewish life and customs, and every holiday we had a stranger at the table. I used to help my mother deliver food on Fridays before the Sabbath to our less fortunate neighbors. My siblings were captivated with the labor and Zionist movements. Grodno remained an active Zionist center, even under the Soviet rule from 1939 through 1941. My father employed around 20 people as a famous tailor. Two of my brothers owned bakeries. One was a designer, one a cabinet maker. My sisters raised their children. I finished the best government school for girls. Only two Jewish girls were permitted to attend, and I was one of them. I was to start high school as one of the two Jewish girls in a class, but the war started, and that was the end of that. I also went to a Jewish school after regular school to learn the Jewish language, Yiddish, I'm assuming. In 1936, I experienced my first encounter with anti-Semitism. One day before the last class, a Polish friend of mine told me to run home, and on the way home, I witnessed my first pogrom. The second time, when I was about 10 years old and was being trained to go illegally to Israel, I was in a Zionist organization called Tel HaShomer. A group of youngsters went to a moshawa by the lake, the Yemen, in a village not far from the city. The farmers tried to attack us. If it weren't for our instructor, who demonstrated to them his skills to fight back and his knowledge of sports, we would not be alive. The murder of 29,000 Jews from Grodno by the Germans started in 1941 through 1943. On September 1, 1939, the German troops poured over the border and Luftwaffe pilots rained destruction on Poland cities. Poland was carved up between Germany and the Soviet Union. Grodno fell within the Soviet Union and was controlled by the Russians until the Nazis occupied it on June 22nd, 1941. The day Germany reneged on the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and invaded the Soviet Union. The Russian occupation though in no way as savage as the one which was to follow, brought with it a period of great hardship and repression. Those considered rich by the Soviets or deemed members of the intelligentsia were dispatched immediately to Siberia. Though it was certainly not their intention, the Russians actually saved their lives by removing them from the reach of the Nazi juggernaut. On November 1st, 1941, the Nazis ordered the establishment of two ghettos. Ghetto A, number one, for skilled workers was in the Schulhof, or synagogue area, already considered a Jewish neighborhood. Ghetto B, number two, for those considered unproductive or expendable, was set up on the suburb of Slobodka. The ghetto number two was liquidated in November 1942. And those people were right away sent to Auschwitz. Half of my family were among them. Just before the liquidation of ghetto number two, I ran away to ghetto number one to be with the rest of my family. That same month, 4,000 people were expelled from the ghetto number one to the transit camp of Kelvasin, 6 kilometers from Grodno. My cousin, to be in the future my husband, and one of his little sons escaped from there back to ghetto number one. Some of them died there as a result of the inhumane conditions. The rest were expelled together with the Jewish population in the villages in the Grodno region and sent to Auschwitz or Treblinka. In the big Nazi action of January 17th, 1922, 10,000 Jews were sent to Auschwitz extermination camp, the rest of my family among them. I was hiding in the attic while my mother, one of my brothers, one of my sisters, and their families were forced out of the place we were staying. I can still hear my mother's words when she called out, "Zelda, think of us. Don't forget about us. I know you will survive." Excuse me. I was in Operation 5000, the last large gathering from Grodno, from the great synagogue that was considered as one of the most beautiful synagogues in all of Europe, where many famous cantors had performed, to be led to the trains located across town to Treblinka. Early in 1942, a Jewish underground resistance and defense movement was formed. Members of the Zionist youth movements, especially women, set up a communication center in Grodno for contact with the ghettos in Vilna, Bialystok, and Warsaw. There was also a workshop for forging Aryan papers and permits for members of the movement engaged in rescuing Jews and armed defense. Before the big action, as she called it, an unsuccessful attempt was made by us to assassinate Streblo, a chief executioner of Grodno Jewelry. Among those killed was my brother's best friend. There was also no attempt to organize a mass escape from the Great Synagogue, which served as a collection center for deportation, and to assassinate Kirk Wiese, the other chief executioner of Grodno Jewelry. According to a Nazi source, 44,049 Grodno Jews were sent to the extermination camps, 20,577 from Grodno itself, and 23,472 from the neighboring towns. After surviving the 6 death camps, including Treblinka, Majdanek, Lublin, Blizin, Auschwitz, I was put on a train once more, and on January 1st, 1945, that train entered into Bergen-Belsen, another death camp, where hundreds of thousands died from starvation and disease alone. 3 months later, on April 14th, 1945, we heard rumors that the guards and the commandants of the camp had run away because the liberation armies were approaching. We thought the Germans would probably blow up our camp with mines to destroy the rest of us, but the British army approached the camp the very next day. I witnessed the German commandant and all the Nazi guards digging 3 large graves in which thousands of corpses were buried. Right after the liberation of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, the barracks were burned and we were all sprayed with disinfectant and we slept in the Nazi soldiers' quarters. The first thing we had to do is register our names in survivors' books. Of course, I had no place to go. In the middle of May, two young men came to Bergen-Belsen from Munich, among others, looking for me. They told me that they survived Dachau thanks to a man from Grodno who took care of them in the camps and saved their lives. After discovering that I had survived, the man named Eli Grozhansky, who was a cousin of mine, asked them to find me and bring me back to Munich if I wanted to come. My mother and her cousin Eli had met the winter before on two death camp marches, each one of them going to a different camp. And they saw each other, recognized each other. I don't know how, given that they probably lost 50 pounds or more each, and said that they would find each other after the war. So that was just really incredibly lucky. The journey from Bergen-Belsen to Munich was a rough one, and it was another miracle that I survived. There was no transportation because the trains and train stations were all bombed out. They found a food truck driver with whom we caught a ride. And as we got close to Hanover, the open truck made a left turn too quickly, and there were so many of us packed in the truck, we all couldn't hold on to anything, and everyone fell out of the truck. Many people had serious injuries and had to return to Bergen-Belsen. But I managed to escape unharmed. The two men and I walked following the train tracks all the way to Hanover. As we came closer to Hanover, we happened to find a coal train going to Munich. So we climbed aboard, and that was also lucky, and slept on top of the coal barrels. It took us 4 days to get to Munich. But when we finally arrived in Munich, I met Eli. Eli and I never had to stay in a displaced persons camp in Munich. We registered affidavits to go to 3 different places in the United States, first of all, because Eli had a brother, his oldest brother, Julius, who moved there after the First World War. Sweden, because Eli had a sister there. And Israel, where we were to go illegally if we could. We agreed we would accept the first affidavit that was approved. Luckily for us, our registration to go to the US came first. We arrived in New York on September 10th, 1946. On September 16th, we were greeted at the dock by two men. One was a relative, and the other was a famous Jewish actor named Herman Yablokov. Both were members of the Grodno Benevolent Society. The society had arranged a gathering of all the people who belonged to the organization in the US and Canada to meet us, since we were the first survivors from Grodno to come to America, and the second ship with survivors on it to come to the United States as well. They all wanted to know if we knew any of their surviving relatives. A banquet was held for us at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and that raised funds for the survivors going to Israel. There, Eli and I got to speak about our experiences and answer many questions. On our way to California to meet Eli's brother, we stopped in Chicago where the society had arranged for us to speak. We finally arrived in Los Angeles in October of 1946. And in the months following, we continued to speak up at fundraisers to help the Grodno survivors who went to Israel illegally. And on December 29th, 1946, Eli and I were married, and a new life in Los Angeles began. Um, so I think I need to break, and maybe Laura could speak a little bit right now, and we could see what time we have for some further information that I can talk about.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mom, for sharing that. I'm going to actually read the speech that or part of the speech that my sister wrote for my grandmother at her funeral, because it's way better than mine, I think. Um, okay.
Not true.
There's no question where my grandmother inherited her strength. She was given a purpose by her own mother, whose last words to her before being separated and eventually killed in a death camp were, "Don't forget us, you will survive to tell our story." These words were a constant echo in my life growing up, being raised in the shadow of the Holocaust. My grandfather Eli was also a survivor, but had a more stoic nature, only raising his voice to quiet his two fighting granddaughters. My grandfather had lost too much to speak of it, and so he left it to my grandmother to tell their story to anyone who would listen, beginning with how her town of Grodno was invaded, to her time at various concentration camps, and finally her liberation from Bergen-Belsen. Without shedding a tear, she would tell you dates of invasions, names of the 6 death camps she was in and out of, her experience in the ghetto, and what happened to her entire family there. It wasn't until I was 11 years old in this very room that I saw my grandmother cry for the first time. My grandfather had just passed, and finally she let herself go, pouring tears for the only person that would ever really know her, and bellowing cries for what seemed loud enough for the 6 million that perished to hear. I will never forget that day that revealed to me that the strongest women feel the most pain, and that these weren't just stories you tell casually at the table. This actually happened to my family. It was something that until age 11, I couldn't possibly comprehend until she was brave enough to show me her pain. For so long, my wish was for my grandmother to forget what happened to her so that she could find peace and sleep without nightmares. But I didn't understand the pride that her survival carried, that to forget would be to rob her of her badge of honor. So the irony was not lost on me when my grandmother started to lose her memory a few years ago. Some may think that this would bring her much needed relief from the horrors that haunted her, but for my grandmother, it only stole her purpose, and she became more lost than that little girl who was separated from her family in the camps. I honestly believe if she hadn't succumbed to dementia, my grandmother might have outlived us all by her pure will to survive. So, how can I tell my grandmother's story in a way that honors the storyteller? The things that stick out to me are not the dates and events shared with strangers or in interviews. What I remember are the small gestures of faith and evidence of a higher power, and the coincidences that kept her alive. How she risked her life to hide a little girl under a bed to save her. A girl that survived and later reached out to my grandmother to thank her. How she hid a hair comb in her clothes so that she didn't get lice, and a fence that could have gotten her killed. How she found my grandfather in an adjoining camp and he repaired her shoes, which saved her life during a death march through a winter storm. How on the days when she gave up and even volunteered herself to be killed instead of others in the firing squad, her life would somehow be spared. Or when the gas failed to come on when she stepped into the showers that killed so many before and after her. These incidences not only saved my grandmother's life, but my mother's, my sister's, my own, and our children to follow. There are so many funny sayings that my grandmother would use over the years, a lot of them in Yiddish that I never understood. Things that would make us smile or roll our eyes, things that would make me think she could never be satisfied. But in reflection, I see that I just had to read between the lines. This is what I think some of her best one-liners. Put a little lipstick on meant you are free to attract love. Wear a sweater meant you are rich enough never to have to be cold. Finish your plate meant you are blessed to never go hungry. Open the light or close the light meant you can choose when to sit in the darkness and when to be illuminated. And get your hair out of your face meant open your eyes to the world around you and show them what a miracle looks like. It was by the grace of God that my grandparents survived the war and somehow found each other to build a life out of nothing to provide their family with everything. And so, when my sister posted a photo yesterday on Facebook of my young grandparents after their liberation with the caption "Together Again," I found the first comfort I have had since her diagnosis. If anyone can search out a miracle, it's them. And I believe they have found each other once again.
You can read your own story too.
No, mine was silly. Hers is much better.
Yours was not silly.
It's okay.
Uh, it's emotional, definitely. Um, I can talk a little bit. There was a couple of things I wanted to talk about a little bit about the miracles in her life. The first miracle was when one of her friends, Zelda's friends, was dying of starvation. She found some bread at her brother's bakery and made her way to help her out. And no one reported seeing her. And to this day, Zelda believes that if anyone had seen her, they would not have turned her in. The last time that Zelda saw any of the men in her transport, they were marched straight to the gas chambers. But she hid herself in the tightest spaces to avoid that. Um, and then when they went to Treblinka, the women were ordered to disrobe, and they knew what was going to happen to them in the bathhouse. And Zelda knew as well, but she kept inching backwards as each group of women were herded inside, and she was determined to delay the inevitable as long as possible. And in the end, um, when she went through the doors to the showers where they believed death would finally claim them, they were so petrified that they couldn't even cry. But suddenly the doors opened and the German soldiers marched in and removed 100 young girls to a nearby shed, and Zelda was among this group. Then when they were sent to Majdanek, they were surprised to find attractive barracks with neatly arranged cots and clean bed linens and proper toilets. They learned quickly this was merely a showcase for the Red Cross inspectors and that they themselves would sleep on the ground outdoors. They went to another camp after Majdanek, and the unique feature about that camp was that they were in a huge tent, which was once used to house elephants and other circus animals. This Lublin camp had garages and storehouses crammed with clothes and belongings of all the people murdered at Majdanek. And Zelda's job was to sort the articles and package them for shipment to Berlin. When they were able to find some small items of value, which they were hiding for later use as bribes or barter. Zelda recalled that slave laborers at the Lublin camp were treated just as harshly as any other camp, and during the bitter cold days of winter, the women had to fall out of roll call 3 or 4 times a day. He rode around on his beautiful white horse selecting women for extermination according to his predetermined quota. Each roll call could last for several hours, and Zelda vividly remembers standing in what seems like a forever line in frigid weather, improperly clothed and waiting her turn. During that period, Zelda met 40 women who had lived through the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and they helped nurse and sustain the courageous women there. Zelda contracted bleeding typhoid fever at that point. Although there was a small hospital on site, Zelda knew only too well the Nazis had neither the patience nor inclination to treat prisoners. They were generally the first to be killed, and as she lay helpless in the hospital, Zelda prayed again for a miracle, and her prayer was answered. At the same time Zelda fell ill, a number of German soldiers were also stricken, so a specialist was called in to treat them. The noted physician wished to use a new serum, but decided to test its effect on the sick Jewish girls first. And after receiving the drug, Zelda improved overnight. Noting the positive effect, the doctors ordered Zelda to remain another night and assured her no harm would befall her. But 2 nurses, sympathetic to Zelda, persuaded those in charge to send her back to camp as a cured patient, even though she could hardly stand. And she was literally carried back to camp. That shot saved her life, and the total strangers risked everything to carry her from the hospital. She remains convinced the answer could only be found in her mother's words, "You will survive. Think of us." Several months later, when she was fully recovered, the camp routine continued. Women were selected at roll call for the gas chamber and the crematoria. One day, the commandant used a different approach. Instead of merely pulling girls out of the lines, he asked for volunteer seamstresses. Everyone knew that volunteering was tantamount to suicide. But that day, Zelda stepped forward. She actually felt some power propelling her forward. Whether influenced by feelings she could no longer endure the conditions under which she was forced to live, or whether there was actually some superhuman force guiding her, she did move forward. The other women tried to stop her, but she joined 50 women who had also volunteered. They were led to a corner away from the others and directed to kneel on the ground. They knelt there for an eternity and finally were marched out and sent to Blizin in Poland. And then she was able to help unload a shipment of lumber from Lublin and found out that had she stayed, 18,000 Jews had been shot in cold blood by German guards. I don't know how much time we have left because I'd like to let there be time for questions to be answered and to have more of a more relaxed format.
Yeah.
So
We
I do have, you know what I do have though, is a few, where do I put it? Um, letters written by some of the school children to my mother. She had gone, Laura's friends, some of them were school teachers, and they arranged for talks at different schools in the Los Angeles area. And my mother went there, and as well as to other to universities like Loyola University and Chapman University in Orange County, and spoke frequently. They went by bus, a group of people, to speak and support the speakers and speak individually to the children and the teachers afterwards and the staff. And it was really such an incredible experience. And some of the schools had contests to write something up, to pick one of the survivors and their story and speak about them, write about them, and then they would get a prize. And generally, my mother and her story was the one that endeared them most of all. So there's a couple of letters that were written to her. They're short. I want to write a letter that touches you as your testimony touches me. This is from Madison Grant in 2006. I have known for some time now about the horrors people endured during the Holocaust. I have seen documentaries, read many books, and attended plays about the Holocaust. I thought I knew most of the deprivation and sheer horror that prisoners experienced, but your testimony brought new light to my understanding. You taught me about the miracle of hope. Many times during captivity, you took a chance. When you needed to get from one ghetto to another, you slipped in with people who had passes, despite the consequences if you were caught. Another time, when you wanted to find a piece of bread for your friends, you went out after curfew, ran to your brother's store, risking your life. And when the Germans asked for a seamstress, most thought it was a ruse and they would be killed. You volunteered, which saved your life. Your testimony has special meaning to me today. This evening, I celebrated Hanukkah with my family. When I mentioned I was writing a letter to a Holocaust survivor, a dear family friend of mine named Julie told me about her parents, both Holocaust survivors, and Julie's mother was also in the 39 Club. She shared stories of her mother's bravery, and I realized that even though Julie had not personally viewed your video, you touched her through me. I understand now that the miracle of your hope lives on in the people who learn and retell your story. Elie Wiesel once said, "Hope is like peace. It's not a gift from God. It is a gift only we can give to one another. It takes an especially strong person to remain hopeful through all your travail, and in the middle of all of it, you helped your friends and family, giving them hope too. Even now, after surviving the Holocaust, you transfer your hope to those who view your testimony. Watching your testimony has already influenced my life. It reminds me to be brave and courageous even in the worst of times. You demonstrated this perfectly for me, and I will always remember to take chances. Many times this saved your life, and I will remember not to be a lemming and not to follow everything everyone else is doing. This philosophy helped you immensely during your journey, and I recognize that miracles can happen even in the most horrible time and place. Your never-ending belief in life and freedom is a miracle in itself, and also the fact that you can go on smiling and living even after what you experienced is an amazing miracle. Perhaps the grandest miracle of all, however, is that people can share your story and realize their own hope. With great appreciation, Madison Grant. Okay, I'll stop there.
That was incredibly beautiful. So thank you so much for reading that. Um, and you timed it, I do have to say, perfectly. So we're right at the point where we're ready for audience questions. But I would just like to take a moment to thank you both so much for coming and sharing your stories. It has been really moving so far. Um, I also would like to remind our audience we've got some great questions already, but if you feel so inspired to submit questions while we're speaking, definitely feel free to submit your questions, and I'll do my very best to get to everyone's. Um, so I'll start with a question that was just submitted. Um, Frieda, they would like to know if your father changed his original name to be more Americanized to Gordon, or if that was what his original last name was.
That's a good question. Yes. And so interestingly enough, Eli and Zelda were first cousins.
Mm.
Um, they didn't know each other very well because of their age difference, and Eli didn't, he was busy with his own family. They didn't ever live near each other, but it was a big city. So, and his family name was Grojenska or Grojenski, and my mother was Grojenska because in Polish, the female has the A and the I think I'm getting it right, and the male has the I ending. I mean, I think it's in a lot of the countries there, Russian and Polish and Ukrainian and other countries. But yes, he did change his name when they came through Ellis Island. He took the name that his brother Julius had taken of Gordon when they came in the 20s.
Thank you for sharing and great question. We have another viewer who first is just commenting on how beautiful Zelda's story is. And they would like to know, you mentioned that you weren't always aware of this story that she wrote. So they're wondering where this text was living before you heard about it.
I don't think that my father never wrote anything about the Holocaust and never spoke really about it. Um, Never. When I was growing up, not to me and not to anybody I knew. My mother couldn't either really speak about it. And when they were with their friends, they didn't really speak about the past either. Um, it was really only after, I'd been gone away to college and got married and had kids and I think my mom I'm not sure what caused her to reach out and start to speak, but it wasn't until the mid 80s, I think, that she started to speak. But I didn't I didn't go to those places where she was speaking. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, when the Shoah Project began um, at USC and UCLA, she was one of the first to be interviewed. Um, Carol Hellman was in charge of reaching out to the survivors and videotaping their testimony. And you can find her testimony, as was mentioned, um, on the Shoah, but I don't know, on the USC website regarding the show. But also, really, if you just Google Zelda Gordon, there are many video recordings of her, and it's all very interesting. So, but I was had my own life and my own issues, and we never had talked about it. So I only learned about it when, she was quite old and I was, already older than Laura before I really heard much about anything.
How about
But
when they went to Germany to testify?
well, yes, I mean, I knew that they went to testify and they came to visit me at Oberlin College, but we didn't talk about what happened other than the fact that the commandant of the camp, um, uh, I forget where was it that they went to. Was it in Hanover? It wasn't Nuremberg. It was another camp, but another city where this Nazi officer was on trial, but he was convicted. But they didn't really tell me anything about it. There were no pictures, and they they brought back a lot of um get things that they bought there because they weren't allowed to bring cash out, so they bought a lot of stuff and basically to show that they could afford it, whatever. And that was their main thing, was to show the Germans that they survived. My mother, went in her mink coat to show that they survived and they were successful despite every attempt at annihilating them.
Thank you
I,
for
I
sharing.
just I just found I found that text, among her things, really.
Oh,
And I didn't know really about the project of creating the book, lest we forget either. I mean, I did get we all got copies of it whenever that was, but there were no discussions about it.
well, thank
Just
you
too
for
difficult.
sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how fortunate that the text was found. Um, we have another question that is actually for both of you. We have someone who's wondering, you know, um, how being, respectively a second generation and then a third generation of Holocaust survivors has impacted your own lives, and if you've noticed that it's impacted you in different ways since you're one generation removed.
I think that's a good question for Laura.
So how it's impacted me?
Mhm. I know that's very broad, so however you interpret that.
I think that for a quick answer is just in general to know that, when I am experiencing the hard times or trauma or loss, it's good to be able to compare it to the struggle, not to minimize my own. Um, but also just her dedication to family and thinking, putting family first always. Um, I was just noticing another question. I know we'll get to it, but it's just like it's part of this, so I could answer it real quick. But, did she encourage us to take risks? I would say the opposite,
The
that
opposite.
if it was a slight drop in temperature, if it was raining, there would be no absolutely fear of
Mm.
anything that was potentially risky. Traveling was always a risk, so there was a lot of fear associated with us doing things, but I didn't let that stop me, and I didn't find that I was very fearful of taking risks because I did things that were pretty risky in terms of, doing, just activities. But um, yeah, my sister actually had a good point. And I had a friend who I talked to last night that reminded me that during COVID, when we were forced to being told by
Mm.
authorities that we weren't allowed to be together and we couldn't leave our homes and we couldn't touch anything, that that triggered a trauma in me that seemed
Mm.
deeper than others. And I was yeah, I was fighting back against that a lot.
For
So
your sister as well,
yeah, for both of us.
terribly.
Yeah, a friend reminded me about that. And even just, when there's just political things happening, it's like a heavier response from me when a freedom is taken away. So yeah, it definitely affected me in that way. But I, I think, but it didn't, if, yeah, it didn't really affect my ability to do what I want to do. In fact, I feel like I want to do everything that I can do because we're here and we're living.
And to help humanity and the
Hmm.
animals that you love and all of that, beyond, I mean, you are very tenacious. I think that's what all three of us,
Hmm.
we all have, we all share a lot of trauma and how that's affected our life. For me, it was more escape. I was always, wanting to escape. I felt like I grew up in a prison with people that were not well mentally, and I had nobody to talk to, and it was chaotic and a lot of screaming, and they were overbearingly preventing me from uh, finding myself and exploring my own goals. And I couldn't cross the street by myself or ride my bike on the street. They were so afraid that they would lose me. I was everything to them. So for me, it was really borderline cruel in the way I was kept. I was the reason, as I said, that they were alive, and they wanted to make sure I would grow up and have children. I had children very young. I think because I felt like I needed to give them grandchildren. Not that I'm sorry I had my kids, but just that was the impetus to get married very young and have children very young. And then my own circumstances caused my daughters to spend considerable time with their grandparents. And so they got to know them in a way that I never did. And I was actually quite envious of that. And the love that they bestowed on the third generation that they couldn't on me. I mean, they loved me, but they couldn't show it in any way other than to prevent anything from befalling me. But with the little girls, they were wonderful. What do you think about that, Laura?
Yeah, I think we got the best of them because they could have us briefly and, you know, and spoil us. But it was, a definite matter of controlling our lives and that we had a good Jewish life, and that we surrounded ourselves with a lot of Jewish friends, family, boyfriends, that it was kept that way. Yeah, so I just
Did,
feel,
did
yeah.
they ever speak to you about the numbers on their arms or, talk about experiences that they had in the Holocaust?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what was your reaction to that when they told you that?
I don't know what my reaction was as I was young. I don't know
It was
what my
just,
reaction
oh,
was, just
okay.
part of our story.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing on that point. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Frida, we have one more actually that specifically is asking about your father. This viewer is remembering you sharing that he didn't really speak much about his Holocaust experiences very often, except when he would, occasionally say something. And this viewer is wondering um, if you noticed that, on the rare occasions when he did say something about his experiences, if he was often in a particular mood or if a particular setting inspired this, or if it was really just apparently at random when he felt moved to share things.
I think that he shared with me good things about his childhood and growing up in Poland. For example, when he was 11 years old, he had his own barber shop. And
Mhm.
being a barber, that saved his life in the camps, because he was singled out to cut the hair of the Nazis. And he brought his younger brother, Leon, to work with him in the barber shop. And between the two of them, they were able to feed. There were 12 of them, 12 children. And Eli was in the middle of 12 children. So, and then coming to the United States, his first job was as a barber working for the Veterans Administration in California, in LA, actually, um, and cutting all of the veterans' hair from World War II and the Korean War. So um, he shared things like that with me.
Mhm.
So, I would know more about him, but not about his experience with regard to the Holocaust.
Thank you. And we have just 2 more minutes left, so I think we have time for one last question, and I think this is a nice place to leave off. But someone is asking, what you would hope people take away from hearing about your parents' experiences and your experiences as well.
Well, I think that the biggest takeaway is to know that there's always tomorrow,
Mhm.
that we can do everything we can to make that tomorrow a better one than yesterday, and that it takes a lot of guts to stand out among a crowd and say when it's time, say what needs to be said. Like right now in our world, people are afraid to say the truth. People are afraid to speak out. Jews and non-Jews, Muslims as well. People are afraid, and um, people are being divided by that fear, as it was in the early part of the 20th century, that created a, a firestorm that allowed the Holocaust to happen and killed so many people, from the Allies to the prisoners alike. And we don't want to get to that point again. So we have to remember to speak out, and not by violence, but by gathering together and bring the word of hope and the fact that we're all really not so different, and we make a world better for our next generations.
Well, thank you. I couldn't have asked for a more beautiful ending to this program. Um, and before we leave off, I would just like to say thank you so much again to Frieda and to Laura for coming and sharing your stories here. This was an incredibly powerful conversation, and we really appreciate you taking the time. Of
Thank you for
course,
having us, Isabel.
oh, absolutely our pleasure. And a huge thank you to our audience for joining us as well.